Hello, folks, and welcome to the third video in this Gaming Through Sporting History little series that I'm doing. And this time we're moving on to football, um, covering Championship Manager 2010. Now, as I said in the sort of intro, this is an important game in the history of football management games, if you like, because it marks the end of the Championship Manager series that was the forerunner to the Football Manager series. And for those of you who are longer in the tooth, Championship Manager, was the king and in many ways remains the king of football management game series. I certainly have played Football Manager since the split, but core memories from my younger days when I was first getting into gaming are of Champman and the crazy journeys you could go on taking a team from obscurity to global greatness, or uh, yeah, falling foul of the RNG sometimes and having sort of nightmarish dips in form. But no, great fun. And Championship Manager 2010 is a great entry in the series and one well worth exploring if you want to, go back in time. And that's exactly what we've looked to do in this series, to a time when Alex Ferguson was still managing Manchester United. Ronaldo, the original, was still kicking around. Um, yeah, and some very interesting stories. So that's what we're looking to explore in this little series. How well, again, as with the other games, how well does the game represent its sport and its history, and how sort of faithful and feasible is the simulation? And we're going to go through international uh, themes and international competitions in this first video. So the first thing, obviously you can certainly make out what I'm trying to do with this very scratchy map. But the first thing is to just give you a bit of an intro to, the contents of the game, if you will. So Football Manager, I suppose, what it's known for now is just having such a massive number of playable leagues. You really can play all over the world. And obviously, the further back you go, the less power there was in the databases, etc. Harder to have that many leagues. Having said that, there's an awful lot of leagues in Championship Manager 2010, but they are focused on Europe. You obviously have the main leagues as well as a lot of minor European leagues. But globally, it's pretty limited. In South America, for example, I mean, these are very rough outlines, but in South America, you only have the Brazilian, the Argentinian, and the Chilean league to play. In North America, you only have the Mexican league. And in Asia, you only have the Japanese and the Australian league. And why am I bringing this up? Well, I suppose to begin with, it's a big feature in how a game like this develops in terms of sort of regen talent and new gen talent, players coming through, fictional players coming through systems that really influence the development of domestic teams, but also then the subsequent development of international teams based on the quality of those players that are being put into the system as older players drift off and newer players come through. And obviously, if your league isn't supported, then the number of players and therefore the frequency of better quality players is going to be low. So, what one expects to see, and we'll explore that as we go through the different competitions, is that domestic teams and international teams coming from those supported leagues would tend to rise to the top. And this is exactly what we saw in our video on Cricket Captain, and to a certain extent, well, to be honest, the rugby union team manager is pretty wild, so that didn't necessarily come through, but certainly a feature of Championship Manager is the volume of players that are coming through as new gen talent that, we're looking at 15 years here, will, emerge as that 17, 18-year-old, but then will be in their prime in the core of the game. So the quality of that new gen talent can influence how well these international teams progress. So yeah, it's a complicated one, that really, because there's an awful lot of major leagues that we are missing. Obviously, in Africa, you have absolutely no leagues whatsoever, which is a terrible shame because I would love to have hadn't experience managing in African leagues. Um, and because you can't manage in African leagues, the national team isn't really supported, so you can't manage the national team either. So even as the human player, you can't manage nations that don't have the league supported. And that's for very similar reasons. The computer tends to sort of it's over time, kind of the player base kind of erodes, so it's just not supported. So you can't manage Egypt and take them to, African, Cup of Nations glory. I mean, that would be a nice story, but you can't do it. Nor can you manage in other sort of prominent international leagues, China, anything in the Middle East. I mean, it's a point of disappointment, I suppose, with this latest edition. Um, but yeah, I suppose the vast majority of consumers of the game are in those European markets. You can't imagine the United States, though, for example. Yeah, interesting choices made really by the developers at this point as to what leagues to support, but it definitely influences how both domestic and international competition evolves over the course of this sort of 15-year time frame we're looking at from 2010 to the present day, 2025. So, number one, let's go right to the very top. The the crowning achievement of any footballer's career, I would say, especially if you're international, of course, is the World Cup. And there's our man, Emi Martinez. I'm an Aston Villa fan, so he's a lovable rogue, but he's our rogue. So this is what we're looking at. Yeah, so we've had 4 World Cups over this period: Spain, Germany, France, and Argentina winning, and those are our 3 playthroughs. Um, so some really standout results there. I suppose you've got Greece winning the World Cup in the first playthrough, Netherlands winning the World Cup in the second, uh, Portugal, and then the very last one, Paraguay beating Turkey in the final. I mean, it's funny because obviously that, having said what I said about supported leagues having that increased potency, perhaps. I mean, that really does fly in the face of it, doesn't it? Turkey is a supported league, but Paraguay certainly isn't, and that final run through is actually the only one in which an unsupported league wins through to World Cup glory. But there's certain themes that you can look at there. Again, no African team winning. We have Cameroon reaching the final, where they're beaten by Spain in the final playthrough. But apart from that, no uh, African team winning the World Cup. No Asian team winning the World Cup either. So, sticking with some quite consistent trends with our own timeline, the World Cup dominated by European and South American teams to date. Um, and then in terms of total wins, well, no team sort of dominant. Brazil reaching 4 finals, 3 wins and a runner-up. England picking up 2 wins. Painful for England fans there. Success in the digital world that hasn't been replicated in the real world. And then Argentina, 4 finals. So Brazil and Argentina sharing 8 finals. Um, Argentina picking up the 1 win, 3 times runners-up. So the nearly men of Championship Manager 2010 being Argentina really with that 1 win and 3 defeats. But Brazil coming out on top. Now, obviously, Brazil have had an interesting time of it in international football. And again, I suppose having created this database in the 2008, 2009 in the build-up to release in 2010, hard to predict that Brazil would have such a sort of stark decline, really, in terms of success at the World Cup. I mean, obviously, few would have predicted the absolute mauling they had against Germany in their home World Cup. But yeah, I mean, the quality of output of players, that still play at the elite level across the world domestically, in domestic football, I think few would have expected the kind of the quality of the national, the seleção, to have declined in the way it has. So understandable that Brazil would have success in the digital world, but stark that they haven't in the real world, having not reached the final and certainly not won the World Cup during this period. Moving then over to Europe, we've got the European Cup and another painful one this for England fans as we have reached two finals, but we've managed to lose them both. So a successful period, one might say, for England in terms of reaching the latter stages of international competition, but not one actually marked by success. As there we go, Southgate's men have only managed to come away with two runners-up medals, but there we go. So victory, two Spain certainly prominent, aren't they? You know, in the real world, two wins in this competition over the period. Italy make two finals with one win, and then Portugal and France playing out the final in 2016 with a win for Portugal. So how does that play out in the European Cup? Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, in the first playthrough there, you've got Serbia. So Serbia is not a supported league. So again, this again somewhat goes against my point to begin with. But Serbia not a supported league uh, in Championship Manager 2010. They do make the final twice, but they are defeated twice. So we actually have no winner in this particular competition that doesn't come from a supported league. So the Czech Republic and Croatia, Netherlands, Denmark, obviously you might say minor leagues in Europe, but still supported. The quality of players and volume of players still coming through, and they are seeing some success. So standouts here, well, England. Well, in the digital world, they do better. Look at that, three wins and two runners-up, so five finals for them. Italy, they make it to three finals and manage to win all three of them. And then the Netherlands. So fairly spread out there, no team dominant, but the Netherlands pick up one win, having reached three finals. What is interesting to see though, is 2024, so the last competition. So this is as deep into our little simulation as you're going to get. England make the final all three times. So there's, I don't know, something in Champman 2010 said that England would have a quality side 14, 15 years into the future. Um, but as you can see, on average, they still lost, which again is an accurate representation of the outcome. And two of those finals are England-Italy, so an accurate simulation of the 2020 final, admittedly out of step. You know, it's in 2024, but two times Italy take on England in the final of the European Cup, and both times Italy came out winners. The one time England did win was against Spain, which again is an accurate an accurate prediction of the 2024 final. But again, the sad outcome for England fans being that only in the digital world and our third playthrough did England actually come out on top. So an interesting spread, but I mean, you've got some standouts there, haven't you? Um, you know, Germany not figuring particularly strongly across the three playthroughs. Spain make a few finals, uh, but only pick up the one win. France, again, you know, not featuring prominently. So yeah, some interesting outcomes there, and some interesting accurate kind of views of what teams would emerge as dominant players as this sort of time period rolled on. So then going into the African Cup of Nations. Now this is an interesting one to cover because, as I said at the outset, there is no supported league in Africa. So at the outset, you obviously have a lot of African players playing across the world who are very prominent. But as the simulation goes on, you know, fewer and fewer of those players are available, and you are relying on kind of simulations a lot of the way. So, you know, IRL, you know, a few teams have enjoyed consistent success. You've got three finals there for Ivory Coast, but the African Cup of Nations generally is a very sort of open tournament. You know, it's hard to pick a favorite at the outset. And in our simulations, I mean, it's obviously slightly different as every other year, so it is far more frequent, but Cameroon do come out on top. 8 times champions, 5 times runners-up, so they made 13 finals. Ivory Coast, second most successful, 9 finals for them with 5 wins. And then Senegal, they made 5 finals, and they won every one of them. So a successful run there for Senegal. Prominent misses though, Egypt, obviously a phenomenal side, well known to fans of English football with stars like Mo Salah leading the line. In real life, they made three finals, but disappointment for them in that they've only managed to win it once during this period. Didn't win a single final across all of the simulations. And Mali reached six, but didn't win one at all. So disappointing for them. But I think again, Cameroon stand out at the very top, and I think that there's a lot to do with just the quality of those starting players. So the players that are, put into the game with their stats, laid out based on their real world experience rather than their in-game development. And one that stands out is just Samuel Eto'o. Samuel Eto'o is he's absolutely at the peak of his powers going into the 2010 season. He is a phenomenal player in game and absolutely bangs in the goal. So it's unsurprising really that with a player like that leading the line, Cameroon emerge as a very strong side in the early game, and then have a degree of momentum of players that are aging through the simulation and bringing in quality through. And it does go to an interesting point about the game. Players age rather funkily in Championship Manager 2010. And it certainly is an issue in terms of how a sports game simulates careers. And I suppose it must be quite complicated to program. But players like Samuel Eto'o, real world players that begin, in game, have quite a fixed trajectory for their career. There's a degree of sort of randomness to it that we'll explore throughout these other videos, but they do decline as they get older. The funny thing is, as you get deeper into the simulation, is that players that emerge later, the new gen players, they don't. In fact, they seem to not deteriorate at all, or at least there is some kind of underlying sort of rate of deterioration figure. And some players, they play deep into their 30s and are just get better and better and better and better. There isn't sort of a managed decline. So again, that kind of goes to how supported teams would come through strongly because those newer gen players play for longer and are better for longer than those starting players that deteriorate at more natural rates. Which adds to the sort of randomness really of the African Cup of Nations, but then again just goes to why Cameroon and Ivory Coast and Senegal sort of stand out because they are far more consistent, particularly in the early game, because they have those established real world players to kind of piggyback off. Then we go into the Africa. Sorry, we go over to Asia. Yeah, and this is another one where the point about simulated leagues and supported leagues really comes through. Australia, absolutely dominant, 9 wins. Japan, I mean, interestingly, it's Japan that are second, but by some distance, 2 wins, 5 finals, 2 wins, 3 runners up. So Australia dominate in Asia in this game and in this sort of simulation. Real world, that really hasn't been the case. Qatar have won it the last 2 times out, so you put them on top. Obviously, not a supported league or supported footballing infrastructure in the game. 1 final for Australia, 2 finals for Japan. So yeah, pretty wild stuff. So why are Australia so dominant, or why isn't it at least more equal between Australia and Japan if that point about supported leagues is valid? Well, the big one for Australia is they actually get an awful lot of European players. As you get these new gen players coming through, they can have dual nationality, and particularly Italian players quite regularly have Australian and Italian ancestry. And obviously, that's a common enough thing across sport that players will play for teams that they obviously have a national connection with, even though it might appear a little bit, even though it might not be overly obvious. particularly with the amount of migration that has occurred between Europe and various parts of the world. So obviously there's people in Australia with ancestry from all parts of Europe. But what is interesting is often Italian-based players that take on that second nationality. So you do get an awful lot of very high quality youngsters coming through as new gen talent in Italy that have joint nationality and end up playing for the Australian national team. So this is a funny, kind of a quirky reason, I think, why Australia gains dominance over the Japanese league in this setup is because, again, because of sort of a bug of sorts that means that Australia has a far wider talent pool to choose from than other leagues in Asia and even than other supported leagues like the Japanese, which is pretty closed. You don't get those kind of dual nationality hookups with Japan. So that's sort of a reason why Australia comes to dominate the supported league, and also the ability to tap into talent that's coming in from Europe and actually particularly Italy, which seems to have a very prominent um, algorithmic push to produce new gen talent with its dual nationality, Australia and Italy, with the player then going on to play for Australia rather than Italy. So, yeah, quirky, to be honest, this one. And then we go to the Copa America. So this is another competition that is, it's a little funky because you have so few supported leagues. Obviously, who's involved in the Copa America can't change, which is Japan in 2010 reach a final. But yeah, you only have Brazil, you only have Argentina, you only have Chile supported. So how does that play out? Well, yeah, I mean, again, because of that established talent, I suppose in the early game, in those first few years, the national squads are based on real life players. So, the shift comes in the sort of between the 5 and 10 years as those more older players sort of drift off the scene and new gen talent starts to fill in gaps. But certainly you can see the dominance coming through for Brazil and Argentina. I mean, what is interesting that Chile, despite being a supported league, has had absolutely no leg up whatsoever. They reach one final in this and lose it to Brazil, but it is dominance for the big two. You got Brazil there reaching 11 of the finals with 7 wins and 4 runners up. Argentina reach 5 finals, 3 wins and 2 runners up, and then Uruguay come through as the sort of third most successfully. Like they only managed 2 finals and win one of them. So it's not to be honest, it's not an unrealistic representation. However, the sort of like the mechanics of the game and the decisions around supported and unsupported leagues plays through. It's not unrealistic that Argentina and Brazil have established a degree of dominance over the competition. As you can see, IRL, apart from 2011, Argentina or Brazil have reached every final, and in the last 3 competitions, Brazil or Argentina have won it. Obviously, it could have been far more dominance from Argentina if they'd managed to get those back-to-back wins against Chile. But obviously, Chile actually come through and pick up 2 championships there. So, yeah, I mean, a decent simulation, I'd say, but one that is based to a degree on design choices, which detracts a little bit from its it detracts just a little bit from its integrity. And the final one, and I wanted to do this because it is there, but this is the most like sad part of the game, I think. I mean, this is quite disappointing, really, that there aren't. I mean, it would almost be better for there to be no league supported in North America, I think. If you wanted like the integrity of simulation, in the same way that there's a degree of integrity about the African Cup of Nations, because there's simply no league supported, so every national team is kind of on a level playing field of having to sort of fudge together teams based on existing players and a low throughput of new gen players. The CONCACAF Gold Cup, however, you have one supported league, so you've got Mexico where the league is supported. So fantastic to, to play and manage in Mexico, great opportunity, but you don't have the US League, Canadian League, or any other Caribbean league. I mean, a lot of those leagues are particularly minor and obviously not the sort of thing you might include in the game. I mean, the MLS 2010, it's something of a surprise it wasn't better supported, and there could have been any number of reasons for that. But this is a clear indication of the extent to which league support kind of matters. Mexico wins 17 of the 24 tournaments. And the USA, well, they do reach 8 finals where they win 5 and miss out on 3. Honduras come through to win 2. So kudos for Honduras. No supported league, obviously very limited number of sort of simulated teams, etc. So a very low throughput of of new gen players, but they do manage to pick up 2. So they're averaging almost a Gold Cup a playthrough. But yeah, absolute dominance from Mexico, and does go to really underlining the importance of supported leagues when it comes to the international forms of the international teams. So, having a look then, IRL, most successful teams for the period. Well, IRL, Argentina, I'll give them the basic points here. Out on top, obviously picking up the World Cup win, having already won them. So over the period, they picked up, 3 major tournament successes, having reached 7 finals. Sorry, having reached 6 finals. France and Spain coming in second, based on reaching both reaching 3 finals. I've weighted the World Cup higher, so more points basically for having reached the World Cup final and won it and been the runner-up. So Spain and France equal there, despite the fact that France have only won 1 competition during this period and Spain 3. Then Mexico, because in real life, they are a dominant force in North American football. Obviously, the USA is a sort of an equally dominant force really for the period. They do compete in the Gold Cup, so Mexico nowhere near as dominant as they've been in the digital spaces in the real world, but they come in with their 5 Continental Cup wins over the period, and then Germany sneak in, having been the other World Cup winner. So those are what I've ranked basically as the top 5 international teams for the period. And how is that reflected in our playthroughs? Well, the top 5 here across all of our playthroughs is a total amalgamation of the 3 different timelines, if you will. Brazil come out on top. They've been consistently successful in both World Cups and continental competitions, which is not reflective of reality according to this analysis. Mexico come in second, as we saw. They even reached the World Cup final, but absolutely dominant domestically. Didn't want to overstate that, but ultimately they picked up 17 continental wins. Absolutely dominant for the period in the Gold Cup. Argentina, England, and then Australia. Australia with their dominance in Asia, those continental wins bringing them through. Argentina and England. So, an interesting mix of teams, And again, one that, even though it isn't reflective of isn't totally reflective of our top 5, is one you wouldn't argue with. Like I think the simulation shows a degree of integrity, of feasibility. The game's done well to make sure that jank basically doesn't take over the show, even though, yeah, the overperformance of Mexico does feel pretty janky. So going to those other teams, the teams that missed out, Spain, good but not great. Only 2 competition wins over the period, so a degree of consistency in terms of getting to the latter stage of the tournament, but they haven't shown the level of success that has been reflected, in real life. And France, similar story. Germany, very similar story. Absolute mess. Absolute mess for Germany. Only making 2 finals and losing them both. So, yeah, a bit of a miss there for Germany. So how would we call that? Yeah, I'm giving it a B. I'm giving them a B. So and again, we're going through with A is just absolutely consistent. Um, the integrity is there, and it feels realistic. B somewhere in the middle, and C it's just all over the shop. B for me, because the importance of those supported leagues really comes through. You can see that with the success of Mexico. You can see with the success of Australia. It's kind of underlined then that the game um, creates benefits and MCs for certain nations in some of the design decisions, which really undermines the integrity of the simulation, and that is underlined, I think, by the success of Australia over Japan because of that dual nationality question. So I think that definitely drags it towards sort of a B. But yeah, it's certainly nowhere near as janky to say that the world descends into, madness at a heartbeat. So yeah, solid stuff. Massive underperformance from Germany, massive underperformance from Brazil. Interesting to reflect on, why that has been the case IRL. Um, but certain teams, Mexican dominance, England showing consistency of success at international level, but unfortunately for us, have not been reflected in the real world. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Moving on to domestic continental competitions next, and then we're going to be going through the big five leagues of Europe with some observations there as well. So thanks for tuning in, and ciao for now.